Please enjoy this episode of the Bitcoin Magazine podcast with Greg King from Osprey Funds. All right, let's take a quick break from that episode. I want to tell you guys about our sponsor. It is Bitcoin 2022 conference. I am sure you saw the videos. You may have been there in person. Bitcoin 2021 was an absolute smashing success. It was the biggest conference in Bitcoin history, crypto history, whatever history of the digital asset sphere. Bitcoin is number one, and the Bitcoin 2021 conference is number one with a bullet. It was an absolutely incredible time. I was working my ass off the whole time, but I got to meet so many incredible community members. And I think the best testament to how amazing Bitcoin 2021 was not just all of the amazing, accolades and compliments that I got personally and our team got, but also it's the skin in the game in Bitcoin 2022. We have already sold close to 1,500 tickets. That is more than 10% of the people, everyone who went to Bitcoin 2021 have already purchased tickets to Bitcoin 2022. We have not released a date. We have not released a city. We have not released anything. That is the biggest compliment. That is the biggest skin in the game of the community being down for this conference. Bitcoin 2022 is going to be bigger than Bitcoin 2021. It is going to be better than Bitcoin 21 in every single way. And we are going to be bringing you the best opportunity to mingle with the biggest, the baddest, the most Bitcoin people on the planet. So join the revolution. Go to b.tc/conference. Get your tickets today. I don't know what the ticket prices are. They are going up. I think they're $249 right now. We just rolled out fiat ticket purchases. All the tickets purchased before today were all purchased in BTC. So get it, guys. Get it. Get this ticket. Be at Bitcoin 2022. See you there. Bitcoiners, I am really excited to be sitting across from Greg King, the founder and CEO of Osprey Investments and the Osprey Bitcoin Trust. Greg, welcome to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So, Greg, we were just chatting about how you grew up in California and now you're over in Connecticut. I'm just kind of curious, who is Greg King? How did you stumble into Bitcoin? And let's go from there.
Okay, sounds good. I'll skip the first part of the question because, I'm going to spend my lifetime trying to answer who is Greg King. But like how I stumbled into Bitcoin, I was at a conference in 2013. I was pretty bored, and I think I was surfing, around on my phone and read an article, probably on Zero Hedge, that was talking about this stuff called Bitcoin. I'd never heard of it before, and I was pretty disenchanted with gold and silver. I was a gold and silver investor after the crisis of '08 and all the money printing that got done, but they weren't doing what they're supposed to do, which is rally when the inflation, or I guess when the money supply balloons out. So anyway, I stumbled into Bitcoin, and by that evening, I had bought a couple Bitcoin on a Coinbase account, which, seems like forever ago. I guess it was 8 years ago. A lot has happened since then, but I'm glad I was bored at that conference.
Yeah, well, I mean, buying Bitcoin then is a great time. And I feel like back in 2013, most people didn't necessarily grasp onto digital gold, store of value type asset. There's a lot of different narratives kind of floating around. And the people that did the best, that kind of actually benefited the most from being early is the people who actually, understood that. Can you kind of talk about, you mentioned, you were into gold and silver, you'd lived through 2008. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some other factors that primed you to just get it?
I guess part of it is I had been involved in creating exchange traded products for the previous, 10 years or so, 8 or 10 years. And because of my career working with a couple investment banks, I'd been focused on exposures that contain derivatives, right? So I feel like I've always been around the edges in alternative investments and thinking about things that are beyond kind of the 60-40 stocks and bonds world. So I just have a natural inclination to curiosity and always kind of trying to figure out what's the next thing.
Okay, so Osprey Funds, kicking it off with OBTC. Can you just talk about deciding to dive into adding crypto into that kind of basket of alternative investments that you've worked on?
So it's a bit of a story, but I bought the first Bitcoin in 2013. That was the year that the Winklevoss twins filed for an ETF, right? And I saw that filing and thought, well, it's pretty early, because I barely understood what Bitcoin was at the time. And I was pretty sure the SEC wasn't going to be, super enthusiastic. So 2 years went by, and in 2015, the CFTC actually determined that they were going to consider Bitcoin a commodity, which is important because it means that it's regulated under these sets of rules instead of those sets of rules, as opposed to it being a security. And so at that point, I decided to try and get involved on the work front and create an exchange traded fund. So we spent 2016 really talking to a couple exchanges, futures exchanges and things. And then in 2017, we filed for an ETF. But after talking to the SEC quite a bit, I figured out, it's going to be years before this thing really gets approved. And so let's regroup and let's go forward with the structure that's already been proven. So by Greyscale launched a trust in, I don't even know, 2015, 16 maybe. And it's not an optimal structure. There are sort of pros and cons to how the thing works, but it's what works right now in the US market. And so we set up Osprey funds and we launched a Bitcoin fund. It takes a while. It takes at least a year to seed these funds and get them out to market. And so earlier this year, we finally got the Bitcoin product out, OBTC, and we've launched a couple funds since then, and a couple more coming in a few weeks, and we're just going to kind of keep going.
Nice. And I mean, let's talk about, OBTC. I know Bitwise and others have also jumped in, as well as several ETFs in Canada actually becoming available. Like, how does all of these new entrants, all of these new options kind of affect, let's just call it the original trust, which is GBTC? And, it's typically, traded at both premiums and wild premiums and negatives.
Yeah, so that's one of the drawbacks of the current regulatory regime in the US is ETFs haven't been allowed, right? So these products, these trusts, they're very similar to an ETF, except for a couple of things. One, they can't be offered publicly. They have to be offered to accredited investors in the first instance. And then what that means is that there's a lag between the creation of new units for satisfaction of market demand. So with an ETF, if $1 billion worth of new customers come in today that weren't there yesterday, well, guess what? You can create $1 billion of new fund units same day. And there are market makers that do that, and they trade back and forth between the underlying stocks and the ETF. With this situation we have now, there's basically 6 months to a year between creating new units and then them coming onto the market. So what that meant for a long time for the Greyscale fund is demand exceeded supply, right? And so that's why you had a premium. Recently, it went negative because I think supply exceeded demand, right? And it was probably overbuilt. So they had pulled in quite a bit of AUM, and I think there's a bit of overhang there as new products launched, like ours, like the Canadian ETFs, et cetera.
So can you just talk about the market overall? Like, what about the alternatives, the OBTC, kind of made GBTC look so much less attractive?
Well, I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if it was like less attractive per se. I think it's just, personally, my opinion is that it was a excess supply of GBTC. I mean, I don't know exactly what they got to, but it was I think over 40 billion. And I know a lot of that had come in through hedge funds who were trying to create units and take advantage of some of the premiums in the market. And once those premiums started to shrink down or disappear, I think those types of investors might be a little more short term and start dumping the stock, right? So, and that's where you get to a negative premium.
So, can you talk a little bit about, and maybe in the context of OBTC, like currently, how are OBTC shares created, and then I guess they don't ever get redeemed, right? It's just a one-way function. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and then maybe compare and contrast with what you explained of how an ETF kind of set, they are created and redeemed on a daily basis to match NAV.
Yeah. So right now they cannot be redeemed. Shares of OBTC are created by private placements. So anybody who's an accredited investor or certainly an institution can come to Osprey at ospreyfunds.io, fill out a form, and basically get brand new units of the trust. As such, they need to hold them for a year before they can sell them in the secondary market. But at that point, they can, release them into their Schwab or Fidelity account and trade them under the ticker symbol OBTC, right? Our management fee is a lot lower than the competition at 49 basis points, and we also custody with Fidelity, which is somebody that most retail investors have heard of and know and trust, et cetera. But otherwise, these products typically all work very similarly. The difference between these trusts and an ETF, though, is really that redemption feature that you talked about. And so because that's not allowed yet, these trusts trade at a premium or a discount. Now, we plan to convert ours to an ETF as soon as that's possible. We've said that on previous occasions, but everyone's kind of speculating about, is that going to happen this year, next year, the year after? It's basically been 12 to 18 months out, for the last 5 years.
I think there's a good transition point to let's talk about the current status of a Bitcoin ETF in America. I know that a lot of people have pointed to Gary Gensler, who's the new chairman, and saying that he's a lot more favorable and open-minded to Bitcoin than the previous chair. I'm just kind of curious, what's your insight into this current situation?
Yeah, he's certainly more knowledgeable than the previous kind of administration was. Teaches a course at MIT about crypto. So everyone thinks Gensler's going to kind of come in and save the day. I think we're a little more cautious than that. I think he will look at the space. Do I think he's going to come riding in and approve all these Bitcoin ETF filings? Not necessarily. He might even, take a harsher view because he does have expertise. And there are significant issues as the SEC has laid them out over the years that, not all of them have been overcome. I think the space has evolved a lot, and I think a Bitcoin ETF is possible, but I'm not sure the SEC is quite there yet. And I also don't think that they want to be seen to be following, Canada or something like that, right? So people were asking if that puts more pressure on them. I think it actually probably entrenches them a little bit, but we'll see. I think if it's going to happen, it'll happen next year, not this year. But it's too early to call at this point.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the SEC's qualms with Bitcoin? Because from my vantage point, I think that there's like a Bitcoin double standard here, whereas you can point to a lot of approved alternative investment type ETFs that are relatively reckless. It's not like they're exactly like protecting investors by allowing these products on board. And then on the flip side for Bitcoin, the access that investors do have through these funds is not optimal, right? Because they can't reflect NAV. So what's the SEC doing here? Like, are they even helping? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think their concerns that they put out, I think in early 2018, centered a lot around liquidity, around custody issues. A lot of those have been, I think, addressed for the most part. The big one that I think is still out there is like this manipulation concern, right? Which exists in all assets really to a greater or lesser extent, but I think is particularly pronounced in cryptocurrencies, especially because of a couple sort of crypto unique factors, right? One of which is they're global assets. Second of which is they trade 24/7, right? And then I think, more recently we've sort of seen this, idea of meme coins and like, social media influencers with Elon Musk tweeting up, tweeting down, and so sometimes the way I put it is I think, the chances of Bitcoin moving 20% on a Saturday night because of something that happened in Asia are not zero, right? And that's the kind of risk that I think makes the SEC concerned. Although they're divided, not all the commissioners feel the same way, and some feel like it's not their role to sort of make sure that that assets are calmed down enough and reduced volatility enough to let the public in. It's sort of, hey, if the product structures meet the requirements and the disclosure is sufficient, then we should let investors decide. I agree with that latter point of view, but I'm not sure that Gensler's administration will take that approach per se.
Awesome. Well, I think that's really helpful color. So I appreciate you kind of filling in the gaps there. I'm kind of curious, you've been involved in Bitcoin for a while, obviously building out this product to make Bitcoin more accessible and adding a lot more variety to the market. Do you think that Bitcoin needs an ETF? Like, personally, I think eventually in the US it happens. And obviously the market is creating alternatives to an ETF. But like, does Bitcoin need an ETF? Like, eventually will people just like buy Bitcoin and hold it? Like, what's kind of your vision there?
Um, I wouldn't say Bitcoin needs an ETF, but people always draw the analogy to gold, and I think it works here pretty well. So, did gold need an ETF? I mean, it existed for a few thousand years without an ETF, right? But then once one got launched, it did widen the distribution. It did pull gold into more portfolio-related conversations with average investors. Because before that, you had to go and buy coins from somebody and worry about where you store them and all that kind of thing. Same with Bitcoin, right? You can go out and there's lots of people who do, and I have Bitcoin in many different forms. But there's always going to be a contingent of people and assets that live within kind of the traditional system, right? And they're administered by brokerages and fiduciaries and people who want things kind of the way they're used to it, having them. And so a fund, a security is a good way to make that square peg that's trying to fit in a round hole to be a round peg fitting in a round hole type of thing. So it doesn't, I wouldn't say it needs it, but it could certainly benefit from an ETF.
Yeah, no, I mean, I personally think everything is good for Bitcoin. So there's always a way to spin it, at least logically, for why it's good for Bitcoin. So an ETF, good for
Right.
Bitcoin. No ETF, still good for Bitcoin.
Right.
In on that, or in that vein, though, $1 trillion market cap. It was about $53,000 Bitcoin. That was quite close to the local top. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that milestone. How important is it? How long will it take to reclaim it? Yeah, I guess anything that kind of comes to mind when you think of 1 trillion and Bitcoin.
To me, that milestone is interesting, but completely irrelevant. I think, as which I'm not a market technician, but just applying a little bit of that, I look at Bitcoin as being kind of locked in this range right now as we record this in, what are we, June 16, 2021. So, these things get dated pretty quickly, right? So, I think it's bouncing between 32 and 40, and until it breaks out of that box, in either direction, it's probably just going to crunch sideways. But we take a lot longer term view, midterm and long term. I think Bitcoin is going to at some point get to the market cap equivalent of gold, potentially passing it up. And that's a long way to go, right? Because gold is somewhere around 10 trillion and we're talking about Bitcoin getting to 1. So I think it's got a good long ways to go. And the number of people investing in Bitcoin still is a small percentage of the total number of investors and investment dollars available. So from where I sit, the pipes and the plumbing are still getting built, and they're getting built by institutions at a pretty high clip at this point, and that just means dollars are gonna flow. So we don't get too caught up with the short-term kind of trading volatility of Bitcoin. And I think, it was at $1 trillion and now it's not, and soon it'll be back again, and go from there.
Bitcoiners, I want to tell you guys about The Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is a new premium newsletter from the Bitcoin Magazine team in conjunction with my man, BTCization, Dylan LeClaire. Dylan is such a multifaceted and wide-ranging analyst. He does everything from on-chain analytics to macro analysis to hash rate and all that kind of good stuff. He does it all. He breaks down everything that's happening every single day with his daily dive. He's going to dive into what is happening in the market that day. So that way you don't have to pay attention to Twitter. You don't have to pay attention to anything else. You can just pay attention to the deep dive, and he has you covered. And at the end of the week, guess what? You get a weekly recap. And at the end of the month, hey, we have a freaking report, a beautiful PDF breaking down all the activity of that entire month, what it means for Bitcoin, what you can expect moving forward. The Bitcoin market is going to moon. We are here to make sure that we maximize your stack. Go to members.bitcoinmagazine.com to sign up today. And if you use promo code BITS, you can get 1 month for free. So again, the deep dive, I've been checking it out every day, and you should too. Back to the show. Another great response. Curious from like a long-term perspective, a real milestone maybe. Bitcoin becoming a treasury asset for a company was like a 2020 milestone, and then it seems in 2021 that Bitcoin becoming a official national currency, legal tender in a country has happened, El Salvador. I'm curious to get your take on this kind of groundbreaking news from last week.
Yeah, that I do think is a milestone. I mean, that's a very big deal for a company or a country to validate Bitcoin that way, and they're not going to be the last to do so. I think what's interesting there is the question, what we don't know, right, in terms of what that status gives to Bitcoin as far as an entree into the international banking system, as far as like a different capital treatment, perhaps in different regimes. So there's a lot of sort of secondary and tertiary effects that I think will cascade from that, especially if there's a group of countries that start to coalesce around acknowledging Bitcoin as legal tender. So I think that's a total milestone. I was in Miami at the conference, and they announced that, and it was pretty cool. I had no idea, of course, like that was coming. So that was a very cool thing, and I'm curious to see what happens going forward as other sovereigns take a look at it.
Yeah. I just personally, I think I was one of the very few people that saying like this is going to happen a lot faster than you think, and it's going to happen at the margins. But for me, it was just absolutely incredible to witness that live. I too was there, lucky to sit in the front row because of the Bitcoin Magazine reservation.
Nice.
Benefits of organizing the conference, but yeah, what an incredible moment, and just the fallout from that. The only thing that didn't really react is the price. It did kind of bounce from 33, 32 back up to close to 40, but it is kind of interesting to just see how long it takes like fundamental shifts like this to actually get digested.
Yeah, markets tend to underreact to significantly positive news, and sometimes overreact to marginally negative news. So I think the consequences of this are going to be felt for a while. and they probably haven't been built into the price yet.
So I was watching a CNBC interview where you were explaining the technology adoption S curve. I thought you did a really fantastic job discussing that, both that as well as the bell curve, which is kind of like a shift or a slight variation on the same curve. I use both of those to explain Bitcoin adoption and why I think at some point the inflection point happens and the USD number goes up insanely. But I would love to kind of hear your take on that technology adoption S curve, where Bitcoin fits on it, all those good questions.
Yeah, so early on, just in trying to explain to investors, like, okay, where are we in the life cycle of Bitcoin, and why should I invest? And I guess taking a step back, find myself saying this all the time, is that crypto investing is really tech investing, right? It's just a new form of accessing the tech. So it's not coming through, equity in a startup. It's coming through, in some cases, coins and tokens in an ecosystem. So you have to think to yourself, well, what do I believe in this technology? And if so, where are we in the life cycle? And so, we didn't do this work. Obviously, the S curve of technological adoption has been out there for quite some time. But it's basically in the shape of an S, and it says that when any given technology comes onto the market, you have kind of four groups of people. You have the early adopters, which I think is the first. There's like the really early guys, which is the 2%, and then early adopters is basically the first 10%. Then you have the asset kind of start to do an inflection point, and it starts to make the shape of an S. But that early majority, which is the next 40% to get you to the halfway mark, most people, I think, in the industry believe that Bitcoin is in that phase, right? So it's passing the point of inflection and getting into the early majority phase. It's not to the halfway mark. There was a study put out by Gemini, the 2021 State of Crypto or something along those lines, a couple months ago, and their survey was that 14% of U.S. investors have some kind of exposure to crypto, right? So we're nowhere near the halfway point, I don't think, but I would expect that the technological adoption curve is what's governing the behavior behind Bitcoin investing ultimately. And you can kind of see it with your friends and family. To me, it was really interesting how many people in the run up in 2017 were sort of calling me and talking to me, and then how many people this time around, right? And it's basically a new set of people. Right, so it just kind of cascades outward, these widening circles. You see new people getting involved, and then I just got an email from a guy today. He's like, "Oh yeah, we'll grab lunch next week, and then maybe you can convince me why crypto is a good thing." And he's a skeptic, right? So he's clearly not in the early majority or whatever. So that's fine. Everybody's on their own journey. But if you happen to be a person who's early and who gets it early and gets there early, the potential rewards are just that much greater.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And something different between Bitcoin, crypto, and previous tech investing is that anyone can get access to the value token, and you can invest directly into the technology rather than into a tech company that owns the technology. So it's almost more just like a more intense way to invest in technology to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one of the cons of that is everyone sees the mark to market, right? And you have to stomach the ups and the downs. Whereas in tech investing, those ups and downs are borne by venture capital funds that you never see. And by the way, their financial statements don't necessarily reflect that volatility either. But we all know that VC funds invest in 10 companies. One of them is going to go to the moon. 2 of them are going to do okay. And 7 of them are going to go bankrupt, right? And that's stomach churning type of investing. But typically the public is not seeing that directly. Whereas now you can buy coins and tokens and kind of experience that type of a ride yourself.
Yeah, and to be honest, so before getting into Bitcoin myself, I was in Silicon Valley just doing, SaaS sales, and being involved in startups is a big reason why I personally avoided tokens, because I was like, oh, these are just shitty startups. Like, I've worked for plenty shitty startups. Like, this shit's not worth
Right,
anything.
right.
So not to decry most projects. I am for the most part a strict Bitcoiner. But not all crypto is the same, but you can absolutely get exposure to all of it pretty much in the same way. And that's one of the features of Bitcoin. Bitcoin enables permissionless markets. And, obviously, these sorts of fundraisers and tokens and all that stuff is definitely part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, why are you bullish? You've been involved in the space. You were primed to understand where Bitcoin could go. You've kind of touched a little bit on it, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what out there continues to strengthen your bullish thesis, and what's the backbone of your bullish thesis?
So I think that Bitcoin as a digital substitute for gold makes a lot of sense. I don't know that the world realized it had that problem, and so Bitcoin came along as a solution to a problem that not many people realized existed, and people are starting to catch on to that. But back to the S curve, at varying rates. Um, and so I think Bitcoin solves that problem pretty well. It is when you go and compare it to gold, it's in many ways superior, actually. And I didn't think I would wind up saying that, to be honest. Like I've been a gold investor for a long time, and to a certain extent, there's no substitute for gold. But the world is pretty digital these days, and apart from the fact you can't hold your bitcoins and put them in your pocket and admire their shiny color, in most ways Bitcoin's superior to gold. So I think the world does need trusted repositories where they can store assets on a long-term basis and transfer them with ease, etc. So I'm bullish because I think that Bitcoin is solving a real problem, and it's a pretty good solution. It's not perfect because of the scalability issues on the payment side, but it's solving sort of like half the problem, and I think that's enough once the world fully sits up and takes notice to make its market cap eventually be a lot bigger than it is today. So that's kind of the fundamental thesis that we have in terms of long-term bullishness for Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of other crypto projects solving other problems, but this one's kind of solving the fiat currency, agency problem that exists between citizens and their governments.
Yeah, it's the base money. It's the thing that keeps governments honest, really, or banks honest, whatever. It's that kind of problem. And yeah, I think a lot of people, I agree with you. A lot of people are ignorant that that is even a problem. Most economists are ignorant that that is even a problem. They think, gold is this relic we've innovated past. And
Right.
it's not.
And
Maybe gold got disrupted. I think the internet disrupted gold. Like people say, paper disrupted gold, like the internet disrupted gold. Gold just couldn't play on the internet. That's my
yeah,
thesis, but it's still like
yeah.
something like that is needed.
Yeah, no, agreed. And there's a lot of criticism of Bitcoin because it's volatile, and so if you say, oh, it's a good place to store value long term, people will say to you, well, oh my gosh, it's gonna move around so much, you have no idea, whatever, whatever. I put $400 into a Bitcoin, 8 years ago. So you're right, it's been really volatile, but now, it held its value versus the dollar pretty well.
Yeah, you're pretty happy with that $400 dropped in there.
That particular, yeah, and I bought more than one, but not enough, right? So,
You know,
but hey, there's more available right now at $38,000 or whatever it is.
yeah, I mean, in the divisibility, I think people need to get over maybe the unit bias that people have with Bitcoin. And I think as sats get more expensive, they'll also become something that people it makes more sense to people too. So
Yeah.
um I'm kind of curious, something that you said, like, Bitcoin solves half the problem. I do agree that, it's difficult. Like, blockchains don't really scale that well for payments necessarily. Do you
Mhm.
see a world where, there are solutions built for Bitcoin to just to kind of get it to scale, or like, what's kind of like your vision there? Or do you think that Bitcoin just doesn't need to even worry about that? That, as long as Bitcoin is 21 million and no one can cheat it, that it's good. I guess, kind of curious, like, future looking, maybe limitations, or where does Bitcoin go next?
I think it would be fine if that problem was sort of never solved for Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is good as a reserve asset, and it has enough sort of throughput to exist and continue to grow significantly. Everything I said about it to this point presumes that there's no kind of payment rail built on top of it that winds up speeding up transactions by 10,000 fold or something. That being said, I certainly wouldn't give up on that possibility at all. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of different projects, whether it's the Lightning Network or Stacks or something, that are trying to build onto Bitcoin. And so I don't know what I don't know, right, about what technology can do there. And I think that would be fantastic. I think that would be great if someone figures out essentially how to scale Bitcoin from a payments processing point of view. But clearly, that wouldn't be sort of on chain, right? It has to be a solution built on top of Bitcoin. But certainly wouldn't rule that out.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you didn't come on here to give technical opinions, but always good to kind of get your thoughts here. Greg, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we touched on a lot of different important aspects of the Bitcoin market. Want to give you a moment to kind of close it out with anything that you want to share with the Bitcoin Magazine audience.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe just a word about Osprey funds. We obviously have the Bitcoin Trust. We've launched a couple of others. I know there's probably some, maximalists in your audience. That's all good. I sort of lean maximalist, but like, I also recognize that there are projects out there that are solving other problems, right? There's other problems to solve besides just the fiat currency issue. And so we have a Polkadot Trust, an Algorand Trust. Check it out at our website. Follow me on Twitter at Greg King Osprey. And what we're trying to do, which I think is different in the space, is we're trying to curate projects and launch things that we think are going to be sustainable, that we think are going to be winners over time. Obviously, can't guarantee any performance, but if you follow us and stay abreast of what we're doing, hopefully that adds some value to the investment experience.
Fantastic. Well, definitely we'll have you back onto Bitcoin Magazine to talk all things ETF, as well as Bitcoin funds. And until then, to all the listeners, make sure to follow me at CK_Snarks. Make sure to follow Bitcoin Magazine at Bitcoin Magazine. Give us those 5-star reviews. You know the drill. Catch you on the next show. Peace.